Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. We love seeing how far and wide our community reaches, and your comments help more people find these relaxing explorations through history. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift as we journey through one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history, the moon landing of 1969. In the vast expanse of human history, certain events seem to transcend time and space, imprinting themselves on the collective memory of mankind. The moon landing of 1969 was one such moment. It was not merely a scientific milestone, nor just a feat of engineering. It was a testament to human aspiration, curiosity, and courage. In that singular moment, when Neil Armstrong set foot on the lunar surface and uttered the immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," the entire planet paused, looked up, and marveled. But to truly understand the gravity of that moment, we must begin decades earlier, in a world still coming to terms with the aftermath of global war, standing on the brink of a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. The seeds of the space race were sown not in the vacuum of space, but in the scorched cities of post-war Europe. As World War II came to an end in 1945, two superpowers emerged from the ruins, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both nations, brimming with technological prowess and ideological fervor, began to view space not just as a scientific frontier, but as a battleground of prestige and power. At the heart of this rivalry was rocket science, a field pioneered by figures like Wernher von Braun, who, after developing the V-2 rocket for Nazi Germany, was brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip. The Soviet Union, too, secured its own core of German engineers and began to develop its own rocketry capabilities under the brilliant but enigmatic engineer Sergei Korolev. By the 1950s, both nations had made impressive strides, but it was the Soviet Union that struck the first blow in what would become the space race. On October 4th, 1957, they launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. A metallic sphere just under 2 feet in diameter, Sputnik emitted beeping radio signals that could be heard by anyone with a receiver. Though small in size, its psychological impact was immense. For Americans, the launch of Sputnik was a wake-up call. The idea that a rival nation could place a satellite above American skies and potentially launch nuclear weapons from space shocked the public and galvanized political will. President Dwight D. Eisenhower responded by establishing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958. The race was on. The Soviets followed up Sputnik with a series of dramatic successes. In 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space, orbiting Earth in a mission that lasted just under 2 hours. He returned a hero, celebrated across the globe. The United States, meanwhile, launched Alan Shepard a few weeks later on a shorter, suborbital flight. The gap between the two superpowers seemed stark, but the tide began to shift. Under President John F. Kennedy, the United States made a bold declaration. In a speech delivered at Rice University in 1962, Kennedy famously stated, "We choose to go to the moon." It was a vision not for immediate gain, but for the long-term prestige and symbolic triumph of American values. The Apollo program was born. What followed was a colossal national effort, mobilizing over 400,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians across multiple industries. Billions of dollars were poured into research, infrastructure, and testing. The Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever built, began development. New spacecraft had to be designed. Astronauts had to be trained for the harsh environment of space and the unknown conditions of the lunar surface. The journey was fraught with setbacks. The tragedy of Apollo 1 in 1967, when a cabin fire during a test claimed the lives of 3 astronauts, was a sobering moment. It forced NASA to re-evaluate safety protocols and redesign parts of the spacecraft. The loss was devastating, but the program pressed on. Each subsequent Apollo mission brought the dream closer to reality. Apollo 7 was the first successful crewed mission to test the redesigned command module. Apollo 8 orbited the Moon, giving humanity its first glimpse of Earth rising over the lunar horizon. Apollo 9 tested the lunar module in Earth orbit, and Apollo 10 performed a full dress rehearsal in lunar orbit, coming within just 10 miles of the surface. Then came Apollo 11. The mission launched on July 16, 1969, from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Aboard the Saturn V rocket were 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. As the massive rocket lifted off from the launch pad, it carried not just its human passengers, but the hopes of a nation, and in many ways, the hopes of humanity. For 4 days, the spacecraft traveled through the vastness of space. Inside, the astronauts maintained course, performed system checks, and prepared for their historic descent. On July 19th, they entered lunar orbit. The following day, Armstrong and Aldrin transferred into the lunar module, aptly named Eagle, and began their descent to the surface. The landing was anything but routine. As the module approached the designated landing site, Armstrong realized it was filled with boulders and craters. Taking manual control, he piloted the craft beyond the planned site, searching for a safe spot. With fuel running perilously low, less than 30 seconds remaining, he found a flat area and brought the Eagle down. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." The words echoed through mission control and into the homes of millions watching on television. Cheers erupted. Tears flowed. It was a triumph unlike any other. Hours later, with the eyes of the world upon him, Neil Armstrong descended the ladder of the lunar module. As he stepped onto the moon's surface, he delivered the iconic phrase, perhaps the most quoted sentence of the 20th century. "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Buzz Aldrin joined him shortly thereafter. For over 2 hours, the 2 astronauts explored the surface, collecting rock samples, setting up scientific instruments, and even planting the American flag. Meanwhile, Michael Collins orbited alone in the command module, a vital role often overlooked but crucial to the mission's success. As they returned to the lunar module, they left behind more than footprints. A plaque on the landing leg read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969, AD. We came in peace for all mankind." After Armstrong and Aldrin completed their moonwalk, they returned to the lunar module, still absorbing the immensity of what had just happened. Inside the cramped, humming compartment of the Eagle, the two astronauts began preparations for their return. Though their time on the surface had been brief, just over 2.5 hours, it marked the culmination of centuries of dreaming, decades of planning, and years of relentless effort. The ascent from the lunar surface required precision. The Eagle's ascent stage, a small engine designed specifically for the moon's low gravity, had to perform flawlessly. At the scheduled time, it ignited, lifting the astronauts back into lunar orbit to rendezvous with Michael Collins, who had been orbiting the moon alone for over 20 hours. The reunion was smooth and celebratory, though Collins would later admit to feeling some isolation, not envy, but a solemn awareness of his solitary orbit far above. Once reunited, the crew prepared for their journey home. They jettisoned the lunar module and began the long trans-Earth injection, a maneuver that would set their spacecraft on a return trajectory. For 3 days, the command module Columbia traveled through space, carrying its historic passengers back to Earth. During that time, the astronauts spoke with the president, gave brief reports, and occasionally looked out at the moon growing ever smaller behind them. As Earth grew closer, anticipation mounted. Re-entry was one of the riskiest parts of the mission. Traveling at over 25,000 miles per hour, the spacecraft had to enter Earth's atmosphere at the correct angle. Too steep, and it would burn up. Too shallow, and it would skip off the atmosphere like a stone across a pond. But everything went according to plan. On July 24th, 1969, the capsule splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, just 13 miles from the recovery ship, USS Hornet. The world watched as the astronauts were pulled from the ocean, grinning beneath their helmets, healthy, whole, and victorious. They were immediately placed in quarantine, a precautionary measure to ensure that no unknown lunar microbes had hitched a ride home. In truth, the chance of lunar contamination was minuscule, but it spoke to the careful, methodical nature of the mission. The moon landing was more than just a mission. It was a turning point in human history. Across the globe, people felt a strange, powerful unity. In cities and villages, on radios and black and white television sets, millions had watched and listened as human beings set foot on another world. It was not just an American achievement, it was a human one. Headlines in countries around the world celebrated the moment, some in awe, others in envy, but most in wonder. Still, behind the jubilation, there were deeper reflections. What did this mean? What came next? For some, the landing was proof that humanity could accomplish anything with enough focus and cooperation. For others, it raised questions about priorities. Why could we send men to the moon while millions still went hungry on Earth? And for many, it prompted a kind of existential reverence. For the first time, people had seen the Earth from afar, not as a map, not as a series of borders and nations, but as a glowing blue sphere suspended in blackness. The famous Earthrise photograph, taken during Apollo 8, and the later blue marble image would become icons of the environmental movement, symbols of our shared home's fragility and beauty. Back in the United States, the Apollo 11 crew was hailed as heroes. They embarked on a world tour, visiting over 20 countries and being greeted by massive crowds. Their faces became instantly recognizable. Armstrong, always modest, often downplayed his role, emphasizing the team effort behind the mission. Aldrin embraced the spotlight, while Collins, ever introspective, preferred a quieter post-mission life. The legacy of Apollo 11 was immediate and immense. It inspired generations to pursue science, engineering, and exploration. Universities saw surges in enrollment in aerospace programs. Children dreamed of becoming astronauts. And NASA, riding the wave of success, continued to push forward with further lunar missions. In the years that followed, 6 more Apollo missions would journey to the moon. 5 of them would land successfully. Astronauts drove rovers across the lunar surface, collected hundreds of pounds of rock and soil, and conducted scientific experiments that deepened our understanding of the moon's geology and history. But not all was smooth. Public interest began to wane. After the initial thrill of Apollo 11, later missions struggled to capture the same excitement. The Vietnam War, economic concerns, and shifting political priorities began to erode support for continued lunar exploration. By the time Apollo 17 left the moon in 1972, it was clear that the golden age of human spaceflight was entering a hiatus. Still, the moon landing remained a symbol of what was possible, of how far humanity had come. It was the culmination of an ancient dream, whispered by philosophers and poets, gazed upon by shepherds and sailors, drawn in chalk and ink on maps of the heavens. The moon had always been there, a constant companion in the sky. But in July of 1969, it became something more. It became a place, a real, tangible place, where people had walked, worked, and looked back at the world they came from. And what of the moon itself? Cold, barren, silent. Its dusty plains bore the imprints of boots and the scorch marks of engines. The flag that was planted would eventually fall, toppled by lunar winds. There are none. In fact, there is no wind, no air, no sound, only silence, and the endless cycle of day and night. Yet, in that silence, there remains a message, one that needs no words. Humanity was here, and we may come again. While the triumphant return of Apollo 11 made headlines and captured imaginations, it also signaled the beginning of a new chapter, not just in space exploration, but in the way humanity viewed itself. The late 1960s were a time of turmoil and transformation. Across the globe, social movements were reshaping politics, culture, and identity. In the United States, the civil rights movement continued to fight for justice and equality. Protests against the Vietnam War intensified. Questions about poverty, inequality, and the environment grew louder. Against this backdrop, the moon landing stood as both a beacon of possibility and a paradox. How could a nation capable of sending men to the moon still struggle with basic issues of human dignity on Earth? Why could billions be spent on space, while schools crumbled and cities suffered? These questions weren't new, but the spectacle of Apollo 11 brought them into sharper relief. NASA, for its part, tried to respond. Scientific discoveries from the moon missions were shared freely. Technological advancements spun off into everyday life. Things like miniaturized electronics, advanced insulation, and new materials found their way into medicine, transportation, and consumer products. And perhaps most importantly, the space program gave people something to aspire to, something that transcended borders, languages, and ideologies. But beneath the surface, tensions brewed. The immense cost of the Apollo program, estimated at over $25 billion at the time, more than $150 billion in today's dollars, was increasingly questioned. Politicians debated whether space exploration should remain a priority, and as the Cold War continued, some viewed NASA's achievements less as scientific triumphs and more as geopolitical chess moves. Still, the Apollo missions pressed on. Apollo 12 launched just 4 months after Apollo 11, landing near the Surveyor 3 spacecraft, which had been sent years earlier. The mission demonstrated greater precision and built confidence in longer, more ambitious lunar stays. Then came Apollo 13, launched in April 1970. Apollo 13 was meant to be the third moon landing. But just 2 days into the mission, an oxygen tank exploded. "Houston, we've had a problem," came the now famous message. The explosion crippled the service module, forcing the crew to abort the landing and improvise a harrowing return journey using the lunar module as a lifeboat. Against all odds, the crew survived, and the mission was dubbed a successful failure. It was a reminder of the dangers of space travel and the brilliance and bravery of those who dared to undertake it. Subsequent missions, Apollo 14, 15, 16, and 17, each expanded the scope of exploration. Astronauts spent more time on the surface, used rovers to traverse wider areas, and returned with detailed geological samples. They explored highlands and valleys, craters and plains. They experimented with seismic sensors, heat flow probes, and reflectors that are still used today to measure the moon's distance from Earth. Apollo 17, in December 1972, was the final mission. It carried the only professional geologist to walk on the moon, Harrison Schmitt, who provided invaluable insight into lunar geology. As the last humans left the lunar surface, they did so with reverence. Astronaut Gene Cernan, the final man to step off the moon, spoke words that echoed with meaning. "As I take man's last step from the surface, back home for some time to come, I'd like to just say what I believe history will record, that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow." With those words, the era of lunar exploration ended. For now. What followed was a shift. NASA turned its attention to space stations, reusable shuttles, and robotic exploration. The dreams of a Mars mission were shelved. The Space Shuttle program began in the 1980s, ushering in a new kind of mission, one focused on Earth orbit, satellites, and eventually the construction of the International Space Station. But the moon stayed with us. It lingered in our art, our literature, our sense of wonder. It became a touchstone, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when united in purpose. Children who watched the Apollo missions would grow up to become scientists, engineers, writers, and thinkers. Some would go on to design spacecraft of their own. Others would study the rocks brought back from the surface, and some would simply look up at the night sky and feel a little less alone. because that, perhaps, was the most profound legacy of the moon landing. It reminded us that we are part of something larger, that our little planet is just one among many, that borders and conflicts and differences shrink in the face of the cosmos. The moon became a mirror, and what it reflected was both our vulnerability and our potential. As the 1970s progressed, the world watched with mixed emotions. While the initial awe of the moon landing had created a unifying spark, time began to dull the glow. The public, once mesmerized by televised lunar walks and weightless astronauts, started tuning out. The coverage, once a cultural event, became routine. In the span of just a few years, the miraculous had become mundane. This shift wasn't just about attention. It reflected a deeper tension. Space exploration had always been framed as a race, a contest to prove superiority. With Apollo 11, the United States had won. But once that victory was secured, the justification for continued investment began to wane. What was next? Another moon landing, more rocks. Without a new, tangible goal, political momentum began to erode. President Nixon, recognizing the growing skepticism, began to scale back the Apollo program. Planned missions like Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were cancelled. Funding was redirected, and NASA began to contract. The excitement gave way to a more cautious, calculated vision of space, one built around sustainability and international cooperation. Yet, in the scientific community, the moon still held secrets worth pursuing. The lunar samples returned from the missions provided groundbreaking insights. Scientists learned about the moon's volcanic past, its bombardment by meteorites, and its surprising similarity to Earth. The prevailing theory that the moon was formed from a collision between a young Earth and a Mars-sized body was strengthened by this evidence. Geologists studied tiny glass beads in the soil that had been formed by ancient impacts. Physicists analyzed isotopic ratios. Even today, those samples are still yielding new discoveries, as modern technology allows deeper analysis than was possible in the 1970s. The moon had become not just a destination, but a laboratory, a frozen record of early solar system history. Culturally, the moon remained potent. It featured in books, films, songs, and dreams. Artists interpreted the moon landing in countless ways. Filmmakers speculated on future missions, while poets captured the quiet mystery of that distant world. The image of the blue Earth rising over the lunar horizon, so fragile, so alone, would inspire environmental movements, philosophical reflections, and countless imaginations. Meanwhile, other nations began to rise. The Soviet Union continued their space program with a focus on orbital stations like Mir. Later, new players would emerge: Japan, the European Space Agency, China, and India, each launching missions, building satellites, and eventually setting their sights on the moon. But for all these advances, no human would walk on the moon again for decades. The surface remained untouched, the footprints undisturbed. The equipment left behind, flagpoles, reflectors, descent stages, stood as silent monuments to a different era. And in that silence, the question lingered: When would we return? Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, space exploration turned inward, toward Earth orbit, toward technology and communication. The Hubble Space Telescope brought the universe into our living rooms. Robotic missions explored Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But the moon waited, unchanged. In the minds of dreamers, however, it never faded. The moon remained a symbol, not just of the past, but of the future. A stepping stone, a proving ground, a beacon. Because despite the decades that had passed, one truth remained constant. We had been there. We had touched it. And that meant we could do it again. As we moved into the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the moon remained in orbit, silent, distant, and ever watching, while Earth itself changed in dramatic ways. The geopolitical landscape shifted. The Cold War that had fueled the space race came to an end. New alliances were formed. Technology advanced at an exponential pace. And all the while, our understanding of space and of our place within it deepened. NASA had transitioned from the glory of Apollo to the utility of the space shuttle. First launched in 1981, the shuttle was a marvel of reusable engineering, capable of ferrying astronauts and equipment into low Earth orbit and returning them safely home. It was during this era that the foundations of the International Space Station were laid. A joint effort among nations, the ISS would come to represent a new vision for space, not a battleground of ideologies, but a collaborative frontier. Still, the moon called to us. Scientists, dreamers, and engineers continued to study it, to argue for its relevance. New lunar missions, though robotic, began to pick up pace. In 1994, NASA's Clementine mission mapped the moon in detail. In 1998, Lunar Prospector confirmed the presence of hydrogen at the poles, hinting at the possibility of water ice in permanently shadowed craters. These discoveries rekindled old ambitions. Water on the moon could mean life support for future missions, drinking water, breathable oxygen, even fuel. And with new technologies and new international players entering the scene, the vision of a permanent human presence on the moon began to feel less like science fiction and more like a near-future reality. Private companies began to rise. What had once been the exclusive domain of governments was now being explored by startups and corporations. SpaceX, founded in 2002, set out with a bold mission: to make space travel affordable, sustainable, and eventually routine. Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and others soon followed. Their leaders spoke not just of exploration, but of colonization, of humanity becoming a multi-planetary species. In this new wave, the moon was often seen as a crucial step, not the end goal, but a staging ground, a place to learn, to test, to adapt. Its proximity, just a few days' journey away, made it ideal for long-term missions, for building habitats, and for refining the technologies needed to go farther. Meanwhile, the scientific allure remained strong. Every crater, every rock, every shadowed basin on the moon held clues about the early solar system. Unlike Earth, with its weather and tectonics, the moon had preserved its history in pristine detail. Its surface was like a time capsule, waiting to be opened. International interest surged. China launched the Chang'e missions, sending landers, rovers, and eventually a sample return mission that brought back fresh lunar soil in 2020, the first in over 40 years. India's Chandrayaan missions studied the moon's surface and exosphere. The European Space Agency, Japan's JAXA, and others launched orbiters and contributed research. Through it all, public fascination endured. Documentaries, articles, museum exhibits, and educational programs kept the story of Apollo 11 alive. Children born decades after the landing could recite Armstrong's words, marvel at images of the lunar surface, and feel inspired by what had once been thought impossible. And yet, as we looked to return, the question resurfaced. Why? Why go back? The answers were many. Scientific curiosity, national prestige, technological advancement, economic opportunity, helium-3, rare earth elements, potential fuel for fusion. But perhaps the deepest reason was one that defied logic. It was the same reason people climb mountains, sail uncharted waters, or peer into the stars. Because it's there. Because we are explorers. Because reaching for the moon reminds us of who we are and who we might become. As public and private initiatives revived interest in the moon, new questions emerged. Not about whether we could go back, but about how we should go back. This time, the goal wasn't a quick visit. It wasn't just a flag and footprints. It was permanence, sustainability, learning how to live, not just survive, beyond our planet. This vision was reflected in NASA's Artemis program, announced in the 2010s. Named after the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology, Artemis aimed to return humans to the lunar surface, including the first woman and the first person of color. But Artemis was more than symbolism. It was strategy, a gateway to deeper space, a rehearsal for Mars. The plan was bold: launch powerful new rockets, develop next-generation spacecraft, build a lunar gateway station in orbit around the moon, and establish a base camp on the surface. These efforts would involve partnerships with international space agencies, commercial companies, and academic institutions. It would take time. There would be delays, redesigns, budget debates, and political shifts. But the momentum had shifted. The question was no longer if, but when. And as this new age of lunar exploration approached, a deeper sense of purpose began to crystallize. Because space is not just about science, or technology, or competition. It's about perspective. When we go to the moon, we're not just exploring a distant world. We're looking back at our own, seeing it whole, fragile, shared. Astronauts who had walked on the moon often spoke of the overview effect, a profound cognitive shift that occurs when seeing Earth from space. Borders vanish, conflicts seem petty. What matters is life, connection, continuity. Michael Collins, orbiting the moon alone during Apollo 11, described Earth as a grand oasis in the vastness of space. Buzz Aldrin called it a brilliant jewel, and perhaps the most poetic of all, Carl Sagan, reflecting on a later image of Earth taken from deep space, called it the pale blue dot, a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. These reflections echoed beyond the space community. They touched artists, educators, leaders, and ordinary people. They reminded us that exploration is not just outward, it's inward. As we reach for the stars, we find ourselves. In classrooms around the world, students learned about the moon landing not as a relic of history, but as a living story, one still unfolding. In laboratories, researchers used lunar data to study planetary formation, asteroid impacts, and the potential for life elsewhere. And in quiet moments, people gazed at the moon and imagined the next footprints to be made. The moon, once a distant light in the night sky, had become a place of memory and meaning, and soon it would become a place of return. The stage was set. The rockets were being built. The astronauts were training, and once more the world waited, watched, and dreamed. Because the moon is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. To understand where humanity is going next, we must pause and consider how we've changed since the days of Apollo. The Apollo era was born in a time of urgency, driven by rivalry, and executed with astonishing speed. But it was also shaped by a unique set of circumstances, an alignment of political will, public fascination, and technological curiosity. The missions were extraordinary, yet their urgency was temporal. They were born of a moment. What followed was a long pause. Now, in the 21st century, we return not out of competition, but out of curiosity and necessity. The challenges we face on Earth, climate change, overpopulation, environmental degradation, urge us to look outward, not as an escape, but as a mirror. The moon offers a platform to learn about sustainability, closed-loop life systems, and the resilience of humans in harsh environments. But it's not just about learning to survive. It's about thriving in the unknown. The Artemis program represents a return not only to the moon, but to long-term vision. Artemis Wefers, launched as an uncrewed mission, tested the new Orion spacecraft in deep space. Artemis II will carry astronauts around the moon. Artemis III aims to land them on its surface. But beyond the mission numbers and timelines lies a larger dream: to establish a presence on the moon as a stepping stone to Mars. To do that, we need to develop infrastructure, spacecraft that can land and lift off multiple times, habitats that can withstand 2-week-long lunar nights and extreme temperature swings, communication systems that can reach Earth reliably from the far side, solar panels, oxygen generators, recycling systems, and shielding from radiation. All of it must be perfected here before venturing farther. The proposed lunar gateway is a key part of that vision. Orbiting the moon, this small modular space station will serve as a waypoint, a place where astronauts can dock, transfer, and refuel before descending to the surface or heading deeper into space. It marks a shift from the moon as a destination to the moon as a base of operations. And then there's the surface itself. Unlike the flat plains visited by Apollo, future missions may target the moon's south pole, a rugged, shadowy region where craters never see sunlight and where water ice may be abundant. That ice, if accessible, could be turned into drinking water, breathable oxygen, and even rocket fuel. A lunar base built near these resources could be sustained without constant resupply from Earth. This is the new frontier, not just a return to the moon, but the beginning of learning to live beyond our home planet. And we won't be going alone. The 21st century marks a dramatic shift in the character of space exploration. No longer is it dominated by a single agency or nation. Instead, it's becoming a network, a cooperative endeavor of governments, private companies, research institutions, and innovators. Countries like India and the United Arab Emirates are launching probes. China is building its own space station and has successfully returned lunar samples. South Korea, Israel, and Brazil are developing their own missions. Private companies are playing an unprecedented role. SpaceX's Starship, a towering stainless steel rocket, aims to be fully reusable, drastically lowering the cost of spaceflight. Blue Origin is developing its Blue Moon lander. Other firms are working on lunar rovers, mining technologies, and habitation modules. The dream of space is no longer the exclusive domain of state-funded agencies. It's open, modular, entrepreneurial. But with opportunity comes responsibility. As we prepare to return to the moon, we must consider how to do so ethically. Who decides where to land? Who owns the resources? How do we ensure that the moon's history, its scientific value, its role in human imagination, is preserved even as we build and explore? There are no easy answers, but discussions are underway. International space law, forged during the Cold War, is being revisited. Concepts like the Moon Agreement and Artemis Accords aim to establish peaceful norms, guiding how nations and companies should operate beyond Earth. These legal and philosophical debates mirror those that once took place during the age of exploration on Earth. And perhaps they reveal something deeper. That space, far from being an empty void, is a continuation of our human story, a story of reaching, discovering, and eventually belonging. And through all of this, the politics, the science, the ambition, the moon watches quietly. Its surface, pitted and ancient, holds stories older than any written language. Its silent dust has not shifted in decades. The footprints of 12 humans remain perfectly preserved, a record of our first attempts. But they are not enough. We are not done. The moon still waits, a silent witness to our potential. And perhaps, in this return, we will finally begin not just to visit, but to belong. While the vision for our lunar future continues to develop in boardrooms, labs, and mission control centers, there's another arena where it quietly thrives: the human imagination. Even as governments and companies lay out plans, millions of people, children, students, artists, thinkers, are dreaming. They're imagining lunar cities with glowing domes. They're picturing greenhouses growing food under artificial suns. They're wondering what it would feel like to step outside at night, look up, and see Earth hanging in the sky. The moon is more than rock and dust. It is a cultural icon, a spiritual symbol, a source of wonder that has threaded its way through every era of human thought. Ancient civilizations tracked its phases, structured their calendars around its cycles, and attributed to it the powers of gods. The moon marked time for farmers, guided travelers at sea, and illuminated stories told by firelight. Today, even with our science, that sense of mystery remains. Returning to the moon is not just a technical achievement, it's a moment of reconnection. It bridges the ancient and the modern. It speaks to something timeless in us, the desire to cross the unknown, to stand in strange places, to leave a mark. And this time, We're going not as conquerors, but as caretakers, as guests in a silent world that has waited patiently for our return. But to stay, truly stay, will require more than technology. It will require cooperation, patience, humility. The moon is not an easy place to live. Its surface is blasted by radiation. Temperatures swing from searing heat to bone-freezing cold. There's no atmosphere to protect us, no soil, no air, no water, at least none in the ways we're used to. And yet, that challenge is exactly why we go. The act of preparing for life on the moon is a masterclass in resilience. It forces us to rethink everything: how we grow food, how we recycle waste, how we generate power, and how we coexist in isolated environments. These lessons, though born of extraterrestrial necessity, may circle back to help us here on Earth. Imagine a solar panel that works better because it was tested for the lunar night, or a medical device developed to monitor astronauts in low gravity that ends up saving lives in remote regions on Earth. Imagine energy systems that reuse every molecule, air systems that scrub every breath, and communities that know how to support one another, even when the world outside is uninhabitable. The moon, in this sense, becomes a teacher, a laboratory, a mirror. It reflects not just where we're going, but who we are becoming. This deeper shift towards sustainability, cooperation, and reflection is what separates the next era of lunar exploration from the first. Apollo was about proving what we could do. Artemis and the missions that follow will be about discovering who we can become. It's not a race, it's a journey. And in that journey, we rediscover something essential: that we are capable of great things when we work together, that we are part of a larger story stretching from ancient stargazers to future colonists, and that somewhere out there, in the silence of space, a small world waits, not just to be reached, but to be understood. By now, the image of the moon as both destination and metaphor has solidified. It's not just a goal on a mission chart. It's a canvas upon which we project our hopes, fears, and questions about the future. As the Artemis program gathers momentum and new nations and private ventures contribute their own missions, a quiet realization settles in. We are not simply repeating the past, we are transforming it. This time, our return to the moon is deliberate, thoughtful, designed not to touch and leave, but to linger and learn. For the first time in history, we are planning for permanence. Structures that will endure the harsh cycles of lunar days and nights. Systems that recycle every drop of water, every breath of air, every joule of energy. It is the ultimate sustainability challenge. Much of this planning focuses on one location, the moon's south pole. Why the South Pole? Because here, in the perpetual shadows of craters like Shackleton and Cabeus, lie vast stores of water ice, frozen relics that have likely remained untouched for billions of years. This ice is more than scientific curiosity. It's survival. Water for drinking, for growing food, for splitting into oxygen and hydrogen, for life and for fuel. The presence of these ancient reserves makes the South Pole not only the most viable place for long-term lunar presence, but the most essential. To reach and utilize this resource will require technologies we've only begun to master. Precision landing systems to guide spacecraft to narrow ridges, autonomous robots to explore, excavate, and process ice, radiation shielding to protect human habitats from cosmic rays and solar storms. These challenges push the boundaries of innovation. Every solution crafted for the moon pushes us closer to becoming a truly spacefaring civilization. But it also asks something of us: patience. There is no quick path to living on another world, no shortcut to adaptation. Lunar dust is sharp and abrasive, wearing down joints and seals. Low gravity weakens muscles and bones. Solar radiation pierces unshielded structures. To endure on the moon is to accept vulnerability, to build safety where none exists. It also requires a different kind of endurance, psychological. Isolation, confinement, the absence of familiar skies and rhythms all take a toll. For astronauts, managing the mental and emotional dimensions of lunar life is as critical as maintaining oxygen levels and food stores. Future explorers will need more than training. They'll need empathy, support systems, a culture of care that values emotional resilience as highly as technical skill. This is where the experience of long-term habitation on the International Space Station becomes invaluable. There, astronauts have learned to coexist in confined quarters, to conduct science amid solitude, to celebrate small victories and manage stress far from home. The ISS is, in many ways, a rehearsal, a preview of life beyond Earth. And yet, even the most advanced simulations can't prepare us fully for the moon's profound silence. No wind, no weather, no sound beyond what you carry inside your suit. The landscape never changes, the horizon never curves, the sky is always black, even at noon. The stillness is complete, ancient, and unbroken. And it is in that stillness that some of the most powerful insights may arise. Because the moon, despite its emptiness, holds something sacred, something deeply human. It was the first place where we proved that we could go beyond our limits. And now, it may be the place where we prove we can live with those limits, work with them, adapt to them, and grow stronger because of them. We will not master the moon, but we may learn from it. Learn how to live with less. Learn how to depend on each other. Learn how to be humble in the face of the vastness that surrounds us. This is the quiet promise of lunar exploration, not conquest, not profit, but transformation. As we envision living on the moon, not for a day or a week, but for months or years, we begin to consider not just the logistics, but the culture of such a life. What will daily routines look like in a lunar base? How will we preserve our humanity in an environment so completely alien to Earth? Imagine a morning on the moon. A crew member awakens in a small, pressurized habitat. Outside, it is still dark, deep, inky black. The moon's morning might last a full Earth week, as a single lunar day spans about 29 Earth days. The person suits up, not just physically but mentally, preparing for hours of maintenance work, science experiments, or exploratory EVAs, extravehicular activities. Outside, the harsh surface awaits. Fine, powdery dust clings to every surface. The sun blazes without an atmosphere to scatter its light, and shadows are stark, sharp-edged voids. Each step taken is deliberate, heavy despite the lower gravity. In this rhythm, slow, precise, repetitive, a kind of meditative discipline emerges. The moon demands presence. Back inside, crewmates share a meal, perhaps a hydroponically grown salad, a pouch of rehydrated stew. They review tasks, send updates to mission control, and check in on each other's well-being. Community becomes essential. So far from home, every voice matters. Every joke shared, every memory recalled, binds them together against the silence outside. In free moments, they might look out the window. If they're positioned well, they might see Earth hanging in the sky. Familiar, beautiful, whole. The sight never grows old. It's a constant reminder of where they came from, of everyone they left behind. It's also a reminder of why they are here, to take humanity's next steps. Back on Earth, scientists will analyze the data they send, maps, mineral samples, time-lapse images of the stars from the moon's far side. Engineers will improve the systems that keep them alive. Students will follow their progress in classrooms. Artists will be inspired by their journey. And future astronauts, watching from afar, will begin to prepare. Because each lunar mission builds upon the last. Every discovery, every success, every obstacle overcome contributes to a larger tapestry, a shared human endeavor that transcends borders, ideologies, and generations. The moon becomes a crucible. It tests us, refines us, reveals who we are when we are stripped of comfort and familiarity. And in that testing, something beautiful happens. We grow. We learn to value what we took for granted on Earth: air, water, company, sunlight, color, rain. We learn to listen to one another. We learn that survival in space requires not dominance, but balance, cooperation, thoughtfulness. These are the lessons that will define not just our missions, but our maturity as a species. The moon, in its stark quietude, offers us a kind of clarity we seldom find on Earth. There are no distractions, no noise. Only the pulse of life inside a pressure suit, the hum of machines, the soft crackle of a radio, the sound of your own breath. And beyond that, the stars, brilliant, unblinking, infinite. They remind us why we came. They remind us where we're going. They remind us what it means to belong to the cosmos. As humanity begins to plant its presence on the moon more firmly, another truth becomes clearer. This endeavor is not just about the moon, it's about what lies beyond. The moon is our closest celestial neighbor, but in many ways, it's also a gateway, a launchpad for exploration deeper into the solar system. Every solution developed on the lunar surface has implications for the next great journey, the one to Mars, and perhaps one day beyond. Mars looms large in the imagination of space explorers. Its reddish surface, its ancient riverbeds, its thin carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere, it presents not just an alluring mystery, but a second chance, Yet Mars is far, much farther than the moon. A one-way trip might take 6 to 9 months. Communication delays could stretch to nearly half an hour. Once you go, turning back is no simple feat. That's why the moon matters so much. It offers a proving ground, a place to test the life support systems, habitats, and psychological endurance that will be essential for longer missions. It gives us the opportunity to fail safely, to adapt, and to innovate close to home before venturing out into the deeper void. And with this step-by-step progression, the lunar frontier begins to resemble not just a destination, but a foundation. Picture this: a modular lunar station, slowly expanding. Over time, domes are added, subsurface tunnels are excavated into ancient lava tubes, offering natural protection from radiation. Greenhouses take root, their artificial lights glowing against the grey. Power systems hum quietly, solar fields laid out on sunlit ridges, collecting energy during the long lunar day and storing it for the frozen night. Here, science thrives. Telescopes mounted on the far side of the moon peer into deep space, unobstructed by Earth's interference. Laboratories analyze cosmic dust and asteroid fragments. Instruments search for gravitational waves, neutrinos, and the faint whispers of dark matter. Every experiment is a step toward understanding the universe at large, and culture begins to take hold. In the quiet hours of lunar night, perhaps someone paints the Earthrise on the inner wall of a dome. A musician, floating in partial gravity, writes a melody shaped by stillness. A child, born to lunar settlers, sees Earth not as home, but as heritage. An origin story told through stories and stars. This vision may be decades away, but already its seeds are being sown. And as we move closer to this future, we must ask ourselves, what kind of explorers will we be? Will we bring the same patterns that divided us on Earth? Conflict, extraction, exclusion? Or will we choose something better? A model built on learning, sharing, protecting. Will we write new codes of conduct, new ethics for a world untouched by Earth's history? There is time to choose, but not forever. For as technology accelerates, the pace of exploration quickens. Commercial interests begin to stir. Lunar tourism, mining rights, and strategic footholds all loom on the horizon. The moon, once a symbol of collective achievement, risks becoming just another frontier to be divided. And yet, there is still hope, because the moon belongs to no one, and also to all of us. It has watched over every culture, every nation, every person since the beginning of time. Its face bears the scars of meteors older than human civilization. Its silence holds the echoes of ancient myths and modern missions alike. Perhaps it can teach us something, not just about the cosmos, but about ourselves. To go to the moon is to see Earth as it truly is, small, interconnected, alive. To stay on the moon is to test whether we can carry that knowledge with us, whether we can build not just new technologies, but a new way of being, one that listens more than it takes, one that builds with care, one that, even amid the harshness of space, finds a way to nurture peace. As humanity contemplates not just returning to the moon, but building a lasting presence there, a shift in consciousness begins to take place. Subtle, but profound. The moon ceases to be a mere object of fascination or a backdrop for heroic missions. Instead, it becomes part of our environment, an extension of our ecological reach, a place not just to explore, but to inhabit carefully, slowly, and with intention. This shift is psychological as much as it is technological, because to live on the moon is to accept a new kind of relationship with nature, one that is stark, unforgiving, and yet strangely sacred. There are no trees on the moon, no rivers, no oceans, no breeze, nothing green, nothing soft. The environment offers no comfort, no forgiveness. Everything we need, air, water, heat, pressure, must be brought or generated with precise care. Every system must work. Every calculation must be correct. A single error in judgment, a missed sensor alert, a crack in a seal could mean catastrophe. In this way, the moon forces a kind of humility. It strips away illusion. There is no room for hubris in a place where your very breath is a human invention. And yet, in that very austerity, there is beauty. To wake up on the moon, to press your hand against the thick glass of a viewport and see Earth hanging in the sky, that alone is transformative. There is our world, impossibly fragile, surrounded by the vast blackness of space, floating in silence. That image alone reshapes priorities. It renders politics trivial. It renders boundaries invisible. It brings into sharp focus the preciousness of what we have always taken for granted. The color of leaves, the sound of wind, the presence of other life. Earth, from the moon, becomes not a place of endless resources to be spent, but a singular oasis to be protected at all costs. Daily life in a lunar habitat, while structured and scientific, will inevitably become cultural. As small crews begin to spend weeks or months on the moon, rituals will emerge. Holidays will be marked, not by the rising or setting of the sun, but by the alignment of Earth in the sky. Meals will be shared slowly, conversations lingering not over wine, but over freeze-dried stew. Laughter will still echo, arguments will still happen. Human nature, in all its complexity, will survive here. And through that survival, something new will form, what might be called lunar culture. A way of life shaped by constraint, by cooperation, by the persistent awareness that everyone depends on everyone else. Every breath you take, someone made possible. Every sip of water, someone purified. Community will cease to be optional. It will become the default. And then, slowly, the rhythms will become familiar. A sense of place will form. Routines will settle. And with time, the question will arise. Can we build something more permanent? Can we build not just outposts or labs, but homes, schools, chapels, parks? Not just for astronauts, but for ordinary people. Scientists and engineers, yes, but also poets, gardeners, children. Could a child be born on the moon? Could a garden bloom under artificial light, its roots buried in regolith laced with nutrients? Could someone find peace here, not as a visitor, but as a resident of the stars? That dream remains distant, but it is no longer absurd. Technologically, We are within reach of building habitats that can withstand the harshness of lunar conditions. Tunnels carved into lava tubes could serve as natural bunkers, shielding residents from radiation and meteorites. Ice deposits could be harvested and recycled. Power stations could collect solar energy, storing it for the long lunar night. Greenhouses could be pressurized and temperature controlled. Waste could be minimized, energy systems closed loop, and ecosystems carefully balanced to support not just survival, but well-being. But even more than that, we are within reach emotionally. Humanity is beginning to see space not as otherworldly, but as an extension of our home. The moon is the first place where we might learn to live differently, not with the extractive mindset of colonizers, but with the reverent mindset of stewards. Every decision, every footprint, every experiment becomes part of a larger legacy. Not just what we do on the moon, but how we do it will define this next chapter of our story. And as that story unfolds, we will carry our past with us. The stories of Apollo will not fade. They will be etched into the walls of new habitats. Images of Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins will hang in communal areas. Their words will echo through generations. The eagle has landed. One small step for man. These moments will become not just history, but heritage. The moon, once a symbol of cold distance, becomes something else entirely. A place of human memory, human trial, and human transformation. It becomes the quiet stage upon which the next act of civilization is written. And in time, as presence turns to permanence, and permanence evolves into identity, the moon will begin to feel familiar. Not in the way a neighborhood park feels familiar, or a childhood bedroom, but in the quiet, enduring way that a sacred place does. The kind of familiarity that doesn't arise from comfort, but from reverence, from routine forged through hardship, from survival shaped by unity. The moon, in this emerging vision, becomes a sanctuary of thoughtfulness, a sanctuary born not of abundance, but of restraint. Here, every act carries weight. Every resource is precious. Nothing is wasted. And as strange as it may seem, this environment, so cold, so empty, may help humanity rediscover something vital, a deeper sense of presence. The very fact that you cannot take a breath without technology, cannot sip water without a system of machines and checks, forces awareness. It invites mindfulness, and that mindfulness may become the defining characteristic of life beyond Earth. Imagine sitting in a lunar observatory, thousands of miles from the nearest ocean, watching the Earth rotate slowly in the black sky. Below you, machines hum, quietly filtering air, circulating warmth, managing power. Around you, teammates, each one indispensable, each one irreplaceable, share silence, stories, and shared mission. The Earth appears small, so small. All of human history, all the wars, the art, the love, the pain, contained in that one blue marble. And it's from this perspective, above all others, that the reality of our interconnectedness becomes impossible to ignore. Lunar life, as it grows, may teach us what earthbound civilization has often forgotten, that independence is an illusion, that true progress is not domination of nature, but coexistence with it. That resilience is not achieved through individual strength, but through communal balance. That the health of one part, be it a crew member, a water system, or a solar array, affects the health of the whole. And so the moon becomes not just a mirror, but a model of the world we might yet build, a world grounded in equilibrium, designed with intention, sustained by cooperation. In this way, the moon is no longer a stepping stone to Mars or the stars. It becomes something rarer, a classroom for the soul, a place where the old errors of Earth are seen more clearly, where the future can be shaped without repeating the past, a place where, perhaps, we learn how to be human again, not in opposition to nature, but as part of it, not as conquerors of space, but as caretakers of possibility, not as lonely beings adrift in the cosmos, but as stewards of something greater. As domes rise and machines whir, as boots press gently into dust that hasn't shifted for eons, and as human voices echo in places that have never known sound, a new epoch quietly begins, not defined by nations or borders, but by our shared willingness to reach, carefully, thoughtfully, and together. And when historians of the future look back, they may mark not just 1969, but this new moment too, not as a second beginning, but as a continuation, a reaffirmation, that we are a species of questions, of builders, of dreamers, and that sometimes, when we look up long enough, we remember to go. In the unfolding tapestry of human history, the moon may one day be remembered not only as the first world we touched beyond Earth, but as the first world we learned to treat with care. As our foothold grows and the quiet hum of life begins to pulse gently beneath the lunar surface or in the glow of pressurized habitats on the regolith plains, the question will shift from how do we live here to why are we here at all? This is not a question of engineering or policy. It is a question of meaning. For while science and survival may have propelled us to the moon, what keeps us there? What will justify the effort, the cost, the strain, is something far more human. It is the search for purpose in the stars. It is the belief that in reaching outward, we might finally understand something inward. The moon has long been a mirror. In myth, it reflected our fears and longings. In poetry, our solitude. In science, our aspirations. Now, as its grey dust begins to bear the marks of human permanence, it reflects something more. Our potential for growth, not in power, but in wisdom. The people who will call the moon home, even for short missions, will carry with them the weight of representation. They will not be there merely as scientists or astronauts, but as ambassadors of a species in transition. Their footsteps will be heavy with symbolism, their presence a message, that we are capable not only of arrival, but of stewardship. And in the slow rhythm of lunar life, they may find space, literal and emotional, to ask deeper questions. What does it mean to be a human in a place without nature? What traditions are born when Earth is a point of light, not a place underfoot? How do you mark the passage of time when there are no sunsets, no birdsong, no seasons? These questions will not be distractions. They will be necessities. Because in the absence of all that is familiar, Humans reach instinctively toward meaning. We will bring art to the moon. We will write stories there, compose music, paint with dust and memory. We will build rituals of arrival, of farewell, of gratitude. There will be moments of wonder and laughter, tears shed in silence, moments when someone will stare out at Earth and feel both deeply connected and impossibly far away. These are not trivial things. They are the foundation of culture, and culture is what makes exploration worth continuing. It is easy to focus on the technical challenges, propulsion, radiation, resources. But the real triumph will be whether we can build a world that sustains the human spirit as well as the human body. Whether we can create places that do not just keep us alive, but help us feel alive. And perhaps this is what the moon will teach us most profoundly, that the survival of our species depends not just on engineering, but on empathy, on our ability to live in balance, to listen, to remember that even in the silence of space, we are not alone, that every system we design, every protocol we follow, every structure we build must be in service not only to efficiency, but to dignity. There will be mistakes, moments of fear, perhaps even tragedy. No frontier is without risk. But if we choose carefully, if we prioritize collaboration, sustainability, and humanity over competition and greed, the moon can become a new kind of home, one not rooted in conquest, but in continuity. A home that looks up, always, to the planet that made us, and whispers back, across the void, we are learning, we are listening, we are becoming. And so, as we extend our reach across the cold plains of the moon, it is not just science that advances. It is our understanding of what it means to inhabit the cosmos with conscience. The moon is unyielding, yes, but it is also blank. A canvas that has never known flags or borders or the scarring of industry. Its surface holds no memory of conquest, no echo of civilization. And in that blankness lies our opportunity to begin again, to imagine a different way of living, a different way of building, a different kind of future. What if, instead of carving nations into regolith, we drew shared paths? What if, instead of staking claims, we offered invitations? What if the moon became the first place where human presence was not marked by dominion, but by respect? These are questions that press against the edges of policy and philosophy alike. They are not easy, for already the mechanisms of ownership stir. Private companies speak of mining rights and territorial footholds. Nations craft legislation that seeks to define what can and cannot be done in space. It is tempting, perhaps inevitable, to treat the moon as a resource. But it can be more. It must be more. Because the moon is not just another place. It is a threshold. It marks the crossing from earthbound thinking to something greater. A slow shedding of the myth that we are separate from the systems we depend on. In a habitat on the moon, you see the consequence of every action. You feel the rhythm of every closed loop. The water you drink has been recycled through countless sips. The air you breathe has been scrubbed, filtered, reborn. There is no waste. There is only process. And this realization seeps into thought, into value. From that realization, new ethics emerge. Not just lunar ethics, but planetary ethics. What we do on the moon, we begin to do differently on Earth. We learn to see our home world not as a reservoir to drain, but as a delicate engine whose balance sustains everything. We begin to question the systems that reward destruction. We begin to imagine alternatives. This is the deeper legacy of returning to the moon. It is not the flags we plant or the bases we build. It is the reflection it offers back to us. That we are small and yet significant. That we are fragile and yet enduring. That we are capable of making not just great leaps, but great changes. And in the silence of the lunar night, with Earth rising slowly in the black, we may begin to speak differently to each other, to our descendants, to the stars. We may begin to tell a new kind of story, one not rooted in the glory of conquest, but in the quiet strength of care. A story where the moon becomes our first shared chapter in a cosmic biography still unwritten. It begins with a whisper, a low hum in the control room, a signal beamed across space, a heartbeat transmitted from the quiet plains of another world. Somewhere on the moon, in a small dome bathed in the pale light of Earthrise, a human exhales, and that breath becomes history. Not for the first time, but as part of something continuing, something that will never again be undone. We are there, not as visitors passing through, but as residents, participants in a grand unfolding. This time, our presence is steady, intentional, layered with meaning, a handful of lives in a shelter of plastic and steel, sustained by technology and trust. The experiment of lunar habitation is no longer a dream or a plan or a distant projection. It is real. It is here. It is now. Outside, the dust is still. The craters cast long shadows. No breeze stirs the surface. Yet beneath it all, new rhythms beat. Rhythms shaped by human footsteps, by the soft glow of grow lights in a hydroponic chamber, by the murmur of voices reading books aloud to each other through the long lunar night. The moon, once a place of silence and solitude, is beginning to know the sound of us. And what will we leave behind? Not just structures or instruments or flags, but ways of being, new customs shaped by necessity, new languages of cooperation refined by distance, new forms of art born in silence. Children on Earth will one day learn about the lunar settlers and the choices they made, not just to survive, but to live well, to care, to create. And those children may ask, what was it like the first time we stayed? They will imagine our loneliness, our courage, our mistakes. They will read transcripts of missions, study photographs, watch recordings. But what they will feel most deeply, perhaps, is this, that we went with hope, that we tried to do it differently, that we reached out not in greed or conquest, but in reverence. The moon is not our prize. It is not our escape. It is not our inheritance. It is our chance to prove that we can live with restraint, that we can build without destruction, that we can settle without scarring. It is our chance to demonstrate maturity, not just capability. From its surface, we see Earth more clearly than we ever have. We see its fragility, its beauty, its unity. There are no borders from up there, no wars, no divisions, just light and life floating in the darkness. And that image, so small, so profound, changes us. It becomes part of our collective memory, our shared mythology. It inspires policies, poems, paintings. It softens divisions. It calls us home, even as it urges us forward. Because this is not the end. It is the beginning of something extraordinary. We will go farther, beyond the moon, to Mars, to Europa, to the stars. But we will carry this place with us, always. The moon will become our first outpost, our proving ground, our cradle among the stars. And one day, when a human stands on a distant world, when a child speaks their first words under a foreign sky, they will remember this story. The story of how we left home, not to conquer, but to learn. How we stepped into the unknown and discovered not just new worlds, but new ways of being. It all began with a whisper, a boot in the dust, a voice saying, "We are here." And in that moment, the universe listened and answered back with silence and possibility.